Hi, I'm the Octopus Lady. You're watching Alien Ocean, and let's talk about dinoflagellates today, shall we? In the first part of our multiple-part episode series about dinoflagellates on this channel. Woo! I mean, I say multiple part like there's going to be 12 of them, but there's only going to be 2. Anyway, dinoflagellates are small unicellular organisms that are so named because they possess flagella, a hair-like appendage that they whip around in order to move. And dinoflagellates have one that wraps around their middle and one that sticks out their backside. I should probably use more scientific terminology there. They have a flagellum that sticks out posteriorly. They're a type of plankton, and while they're technically our second plankton here on Alien Ocean, jellyfish were the first. Feel free to go watch our video about that. I would say that they're our first plankton. I assume that when people think of plankton, they probably think of something like this and not this. Well, actually, I bet when people think of plankton, they probably think of something like this. By the way, dinoflagellates come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and I imagine it can get very confusing very quickly if I'm showing you pictures of different dinoflagellates when you're not familiar with how they all look. So I've made notes next to the pictures of plankton-looking things that aren't dinoflagellates. You can assume that all other pictures of plankton-looking things are dinoflagellates. I kind of glossed over this in my jellyfish video, so let me give a clearer definition of what plankton is. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, an organism is considered plankton if it is carried by tides and currents and cannot swim well enough to move against these forces. Some plankton drift this way for their entire life cycle. Jellyfish are an example of this kind of plankton, and so are dinoflagellates. Others are only classified as plankton when they are young, like barnacles. We talked in my barnacles video about how they have planktonic larval stages before they settle down and attach to something, but they eventually grow large enough to swim against the currents. Oh, that doesn't apply to barnacles, but you get what I'm saying. There are generally 2 types of plankton. There are phytoplankton and zooplankton, and yes, this is pronounced like zooplankton and not like zooplankton, because what even are words? Phytoplankton are basically like plants, except not really. We're gonna get to that in a minute, in the sense that they have chlorophyll in their body and rely on photosynthesis to survive, making them what we call autotrophic. Although about half of known dinoflagellates have no chlorophyll and have to eat other things to survive, which is called being heterotrophic, and some do both, which is called being mixotrophic. Zooplankton, meanwhile, are basically little tiny animals like krill and barnacle larvae and plankton. Despite the fact that they have chlorophyll, dinoflagellates are not plants, and they're not animals either. They are chromists. They reside in the kingdom of Chromista, which makes them our first non-animal on this channel, so good for you guys, I guess. From my understanding, the biggest difference between chromists and plants has to do with the structure of their chloroplasts and how they were evolutionarily acquired. But I'm not going to get into too much detail beyond that. It's just beyond the scope of this video. Within the kingdom of Chromista, they're part of the infrakingdom Alveolata, the phylum Myozoa, the subphylum Mysozoa, which that's not confusingly named. And then finally, in the superclass of Dinoflagellata, you can find the dinoflagellates. Wait, no, I'm sorry. The phylum is called Mysozoa and the subphylum is called Dinozoa. Wait, no, I'm sorry, I was right the first time, but there's an infraphylum here, and that's called Dinozoa. Or, actually, this isn't a superclass, this is a parvphylum? You know what? Hold on 1 second, I'll be right back.
Several scientific papers later.
Okay, so I figured out that dinoflagellates are in the kingdom of Chromista and the infrakingdom of Alveolata, and then I found papers that seemed to be pretty confident that they knew the taxonomic ranking of dinoflagellates, and other papers that basically said it's nearly impossible to rank dinoflagellates above genus, and I was trying so hard to figure this out that I was reading 64-page long papers that were essentially categorizing all of known life, and this is a video about dinoflagellates. Where am I? What am I doing? How did I end up so far removed from what I was originally trying to figure out? I just want to talk about what dinoflagellates are related to. I'm not a taxonometrist or whatever they're called. I'm just gonna let them split hairs on their own and move on. Dinoflagellates are closely related to the group Apicomplexa, which is a group of almost entirely parasitic organisms, including Plasmodia, which maybe you've heard of it. It causes this super rare disease in humans called, let me check my notes really quick. Oh, malaria! And fun fact, part of the reason why researchers think these two groups are related is because the members of them either currently feed or have ancestors who used to feed through the process of mysocytosis. And mysocytosis is when a predatory cell basically stabs another cell with a straw and then sucks out all of its cytoplasm. You know, like a vampire. Alright, dinoflagellates, that's quite a group of relatives you have there, but you don't do that though, right? Wait, where'd they go? We have evidence of dinoflagellates showing up in the fossil record about 227 to 241 million years ago, but they could very well be older. It's not totally clear, given that, well, single-celled organisms aren't always the greatest at fossilizing. And in actuality, these aren't technically fossils of full-grown dinoflagellates. These are fossils of their dinocysts, which are a phase in their life cycle where they're basically just a dormant zygote. Biomolecular analyses suggest that dinoflagellates might have originated sometime in the Paleozoic, but no one seems to be really sure. So for right now, we're just going to stick them here, after barnacles but before moray eels. Dinoflagellates are, once again, like barnacles and jellyfish and sea cucumbers, found all over the world, but unlike these guys, they're not just in the ocean. They can live in saltwater, brackish water, fresh water. They've been found growing in benthic environments, and anyone who remembers what that word means will get a surprise at the end of the video. They've been found growing in snow. They've even been found growing in Arctic ice. They're very good at surviving in a lot of different places, and that might be because of their DNA. Dinoflagellates have so much DNA. They have so much DNA. They house it all in a very special kind of cell nucleus called a dinokaryon, which is unsurprisingly only found in dinoflagellates. You see,
normal human beings have 40 DNA memo groups, which is more than enough for any species to perpetuate itself. This has 200,000 memo groups.
Sounds like a freak of nature to me.
What? No, they don't have 200,000 memo groups, whatever the heck those are. They have 245 gigabase pairs of DNA and up to 100 chromosomes, depending on the species. For reference, humans have 3 gigabase pairs across 46 chromosomes, and all that DNA is
tightly packed with infinite genetic knowledge.
Stop interrupting me. All that DNA is tightly packed with a finite amount of genetic knowledge into blocks on rod-shaped chromosomes, and scientists are absolutely baffled as to how the majority of the DNA is accessed for transcription. How did they end up with so much DNA?
Almost like this being was engineered.
No, this is such a stupid part of the movie. Why would a literally genetically engineered organism have an infinite amount of DNA? If anything, an engineered organism would have way less DNA than the average organism. You know what? It's not important. Back to this question. For reasons unknown to science, dinoflagellates are just really into copying and pasting their genes over and over and over again. And what is the function of all this DNA? Some researchers think that their huge genome is how they're able to adapt to so many different environments, but no one really seems to be sure. Man, I feel like everything I've talked about in this video so far has made it sound like nobody knows anything about dinoflagellates. But we do know things about dinoflagellates. We know that they play a key part in coral reef ecology. In fact, we might not even have coral reefs as we know them today without them. There is a whole genus of dinoflagellates, Symbiodinium, who live inside of corals in a mutually symbiotic relationship, meaning that both the coral and the dinoflagellate benefit from it, with the coral being the host and the dinoflagellates being the symbiote. Sorry, symbiont. By the way, in this arrangement, dinoflagellates are also called zooxanthellae. Apparently, that's the colloquial term for dinoflagellates who have a symbiotic relationship with another living organism. Because when I think of a more colloquial word than dinoflagellates, zooxanthellae comes to mind. But these zooxanthellae provide 95% of all of its photosynthetic products to the coral, and that includes a ton of oxygen, which is needed to build the calcified skeleton inside a coral. While the coral provides protection from the elements and all the necessary inorganic nutrients for a dinoflagellate to, you know, do its thing. I'm sure some of you have heard of coral bleaching, and I suppose I would argue that's a bit of a misnomer. Coral bleaching is not when a bunch of corals get bleached like bones in the sun. It's what happens when corals get stressed out and spit out all the dinoflagellates that live inside of it. It's actually the dinoflagellates that are pigmented, not the coral, which shows up as white after all the dinoflagellates get Das Boot. Coral bleaching is most commonly caused by increased water temperature, but exposure to too much sunlight along with various diseases can also cause it. The host corals can sometimes survive for weeks or even months without their symbionts, but sometimes they just die. Sometimes lots of corals die. But not all hope is lost. There are some corals that seem to be becoming more resilient to increasing ocean temperatures. Like at water temperatures when you would expect them to spit out their zooxanthellae, they just don't, when they used to 20 years ago. Some corals are kicking out zooxanthellae that can't handle higher temps and taking in ones that can. There are also some species of coral that are almost already adapted to coral bleaching in a way. There are corals off the coast of Thailand that basically go through a bleaching event on the daily. During the early months of the year, low tide gets so low that these corals are exposed to air and a ton of sunlight, particularly on the west-facing side of the coral, for several hours a day. And during this time, the zooxanthellae on that side of the coral always peace out, but they promptly return when the tide comes back in. And when water temperatures get unusually high, the zooxanthellae on the east-facing side of the corals get expelled, but the ones on the west-facing side are like, this ain't no thing, girl. But while dinoflagellates are incredibly beneficial to corals, they can also be incredibly damaging in the form of red tides. Red tides is sometimes used as a synonym for a harmful algal bloom, or HAB, but they're not quite the same. Red tides are a type of HAB, and they're so named because, unsurprisingly, red tides make the water turn red. But HABs can come in all sorts of different colors, and sometimes you can't even tell one is happening. When you look out onto the ocean, everything looks fine. HABs are when plankton grow wildly out of control, resulting in harmful or even fatal effects on local populations of corals, birds, fish, marine mammals, and humans. And red tides in particular are usually caused by either dinoflagellates or another phytoplankton called diatoms. HABs can be harmful in two ways. The first is just from uncontrolled population growth alone. A bunch of algae can bloom in one area, which initially doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but they can also all die off at the same time. And as all the algae dies off, the decomposition process sucks all the oxygen out of the water and then everything suffocates to death. They can also just straight up clog the gills of fish and kill them all off that way. This kind of HAB can be caused by multiple types of otherwise harmless algae. It's just sheer numbers of them can do a lot of damage. The second way that they're harmful is something that we're going to save for next time. But before class is dismissed, I want to leave you all with a Bible verse, of all things. Interestingly, I was reading this book, and it says that some people think that the first written record of a HAB was in the Bible, when Moses turned the Nile River to blood. All the waters that were in the river were turned to blood, and the fish that were in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river. Exodus 7:20-1. Never thought in a million years I would be referencing the Bible in one of my videos, but as we can see from what we've learned about dinoflagellates so far, stranger things can happen. It's time for the octopus lady's hopefully interesting question to the audience, so they leave comments and boost engagement. Today's question is, what dinoflagellate shape is your favorite? Aren't they all so cool looking? Except for maybe this one. Sorry, buddy. What? I said I was sorry! Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2. There's gonna be some very, let's just say, illuminating information about dinoflagellates in the next video. Also, hit that like button. 1 like is equal to 200,000 DNA memo groups. And we have a Patreon, patreon.com/theoctopuslady. Get early access or get your name in the beautiful credits by signing up in the link in the description. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood octopus lady reminding you that you don't need to go into space to find aliens. Oh, you're still here. Oh, because I said I'd give a surprise at the end. Right. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't exactly expecting anyone to show up, so let me see what I can... Oh, here! It's a little dish you can put soy sauce in. It's got a mola mola on it. Okay, bye!